Good evening and welcome to our continuing series of FB Live programs. Over a period of last 1 week, we have been able to communicate with a lot of faculties around the world in this series of program during this pandemic and during the changing normal times that we have to face together. So, having said that, I'm Manish Samnani. I and my wife Malvika, we both run a center called Soch in Gurgaon, India. And the center is primarily a multidisciplinary setting for all kinds of developmental difficulties that any child can have across the lifespan, across the age span, from as young as a newborn to as old as an adult. And we are collaborating very closely with Faith Bangladesh, another pioneering organization in Bangladesh for the upliftment and services to children with developmental difficulties. Both Soch and Faith Bangladesh believe that we need to reach out to as many people as possible, which would be possible only through technology, through social media, through doing some kind of training programs that would be reaching out to them as well as empowering them. Faith Bangladesh, again, is a multidisciplinary setting. It caters to children having all multitude of developmental, academic, sensory, and other difficulties that come to them. And it's a wonderful feeling, wonderful experience to collaborate across the border, across two countries, where there might be we are culturally same, yet we might have our own cultural differences as well. We have been communicating about so many different aspects with our different faculties. We have been communicating about how children or how autism may not be a disability really. We have also communicated about how art and play therapy can be used for children, especially with parents, with professionals inside their home. So today, again, we are here with another very interesting topic. We are here and we take this opportunity to welcome Ellie Goulding. Ellie is from London. She is a certified dance therapist. She's a researcher. She's a publisher. She's an academician. Her special interest is in movement and dance to help children in their development, to help children with special needs. Her area of interest also includes inclusivity, about how children can be included beyond the diversities that they have, how they can all be put together, brought in together with their strengths, and how we can use the movement sciences for these children. Welcome, Ellie, and it is exciting to meet you after we had our a very big program in India and Bangladesh with you and four more faculties from different walks of life. We welcome you, and I would also request you to please let us know a little bit more about you, a little bit more about your journey of being a dance and movement scientist and the work that you do with children there in London.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, it was really lovely to be in India and in Bangladesh with yourselves and some of the colleagues that you've mentioned, who I believe have already spoken on this program. So it's nice that we've all come together again, and there's some positive things about this crisis that we're all in. So sharing information, sharing expertise is a great outcome, at least while we're all suffering this. So yes, thanks for the introduction. I'm a dance movement scientist. I also have a background as a professional dance choreographer and educator. So my expertise is both in creating movement and observing movement. And I'm very, very passionate about using a movement approach to support children's development, and that's quite broad. I have an early years specialism, and I also have a research specialism and practice with working with children with developmental difficulties, particularly those individuals with autism. So that's my background. I have a charity that I am director of called Movement Works. It's www.movementworks.org is the website, and the charity is all about supporting child development through a dance movement approach.
Great, Ali, that was wonderful. And so to begin with, I would also like to tell the viewers that they can post live questions at any point of time for Ali, and we will try and discuss if there is any specific query. Viewers can also put in their questions in Bengali. There we have a good support, and we would be able to translate those questions and convey it to Ali in English. So you could put in English, you could put it in Bengali, and at any point of time, we would be able to take up those questions. Ali, we know that children and this pandemic are really restricted. They are not going to school, they are not going outside, they're not going to the playground, to the malls, to anywhere. And even if we want to, even if the parents want to give them movement within their household, it might be a little daunting task to make them move. Or they might have their classes online, they might have their, a lot of time being spent on the screen, which we always thought was something that was supposed to be avoided. Now we are the ones who are actually recommending, and so we are in a sort of dilemma. But however, how do we give movement to children? How do we motivate them for movement, for first of all, within the household?
Yes, it's very good that you've signposted this and highlighted what seems to be a contradiction. Obviously, we are living in very unique and challenging times, but the movement piece of this is rather essential, which is why I've been sort of given this topic, this title about spotlighting movement. Of course, children aren't able to go to school at the moment, and they are accessing a lot of their curriculum online. However, we know if we just take that particular scenario out for a second and look at the reality, even as adults, when we're sat in front of a computer, most of us, I mean, I'm the exception, perhaps you're the exception as well, Manish, because I know that you know most of your work is occupational therapy, and therefore you're working in a practice-based scenario. But a lot of people are in sedentary jobs and sedentary lifestyles anyway. And if we look at the way that adults behave in normal situations, even after about 40 minutes, the brain goes to sleep. Much like a computer does, it turns off automatically, and we can only and our brain believes we're ready for sleep, and that's after a relatively short time span. We need to start moving in order to recalibrate. Obviously, with children, and particularly with younger children, that happens in a much shorter time frame. And so I think one of the things to highlight is that it's actually not reasonable. It's not reasonable to ask young children to sit opposite a screen and learn like that. Without moving. I mean, they're not even getting the benefit of sort of changing environments like you might do here in the UK in a secondary school, where children, when they change lessons, change location. I mean, not even in that scenario. So I think it's really important to have, first of all, in mind that whatever lesson, whatever learning outcomes, whatever topics, subjects that are being asked of them to engage with during the day, it needs to be a reasonable ask before the children need to get up and move. Now, get up and move in this particular scenario that we're in obviously has its challenges and complications, but there are many creative ways to start addressing that. And perhaps we can tease those out as we move through this conversation. But I think the first takeaway is it needs to be a reasonable ask, and it needs to be an age-appropriate ask for children. To be able to learn well, they need to be able to move.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure there's a huge connection, and from being from the occupational therapy side, would be the first person to appreciate the fact that we talk about a lot in our sensory integration about vestibular sensory systems, about systems that make a good connections. They are important for emotional health as well, not just about the physical health. It's not about the sedentary lifestyle only. It's also about the emotional getting stimulated by movement. So but within the household, Ali, if we are supposed to get some movement ideas, some kind of an options that parents can easily pick up and say, okay, this is something that I can do in within my household. Are there any ideas that you would have kind of tried with children in when they are in the household, or maybe parents have come up with their own sense of understanding from you and then incorporating it somehow within the household? Are there any bright ideas
Yes,
how to
sure.
do movement within home? Yeah.
Yes, sure. First of all, I have to ask you though, because of the obviously, you know, we're all going through this crisis, but culturally, the you know, we our experiences might be quite different. So I recently did a talk for the United Arab Emirates, and their children aren't going out at all at the moment. I mean, you know, they're in total lockdown, and they're not allowed outside. Is that the case for yourselves as well? Is it there's no outside activity at all?
No outside activity for children less than 10 years of age.
Wow. Yeah. So that's not the case here. We are allowed to go outside. We're allowed to go outside in small group. And if we, you know, fortunate enough to have a private outside space, we can gather once again with small groups. So obviously that extends the possibilities here. If you are inside, however, obviously it's quite challenging. And one of the things that's quite challenging to think about in answering this question more specifically is the amount of space available, because obviously everybody's experiences are going to be quite different. As you know, and as I've mentioned, you know, we have an organisation. I'm director of a charity called Movement Works, and we have been awarded some funding to produce some of our work online. We've just been trialling that for a couple of months, and then have now launched quite an extensive program, which is free to access. So I would encourage people to, you know, if they want a lot of detail about ideas and to be able to use that resource. I mean, one of the positive things that's come out of this is that we're able to extend our expertise worldwide at the moment, which is great. So I can talk about what we're offering, and I can talk maybe specifically as I delve into that, some of the ideas that maybe parents can try. So we're offering, first of all, when we've spoken about limited space, we're offering a number of different approaches which are have a foundation in yoga practice. Now, obviously, talking to a culture that's very, very familiar with yoga practice, I don't think I need to go into a great deal of detail about what that is, other than to highlight some of the massive benefits for this particular situation. The first being, of course, that generally speaking, yoga is done on a mat. So it can work for a full body engagement activity with very, very little space, which is a great thing in this current situation. The kind of yoga activities that we are including in our program are orientated towards some sensory enrichment in a full physical way. So it's one of the programs that we're offering is sensory yoga. So it's a particular approach that fosters and is orientated towards children with with special needs. But of course, in this current climate, all children are going to benefit from this, because all children need a sensory rich diet. So it's stimulating proprioception and vestibular senses, as you've already highlighted. It's grounding, which is really important in these times, particularly for children who can't go outside because they're not getting that grounding from being outside in the environment. Breathing, which helps with their self-regulation, and it helps with their ability to be able to calm themselves and refocus themselves for learning. Interoceptive sense, so that's our sense of our experiences inside our body, and our kind of internal understanding of our relationship with our own body, and of course the external stimulus as well. So that's a very particular approach that we're offering. We're also offering a program which includes yoga with dance. Again, bearing in mind that space is limited, and the ability to kind of travel through space is very much restricted. But there's lots of activities that we can do that include a dance element, and of course, as you so rightly mentioned, the emotional health of all of us, not just our children, of all of us, is really important at this time. And to do something joyful and physically uplifting is spiritually uplifting is a very important thing too. And you know, dance is fun, and there are lots of kind of fun elements and creative elements to that session that are equally beneficial and nicely balanced with all the outcomes that I've just spoken about from sensory yoga practice. And then we're also including a yoga practice for children combined with some storytelling elements. So again, supporting their emotional development, supporting their development with language and literacy progression, but also making it, which is one of the things that we advocate very much for as a charity, making learning embodied and including full body activity combined with that learning, which helps anchor it as well. So there's some of the yoga practices that we're offering, and I encourage people to come and experience those, and maybe you can try some of those out for yourselves. And then we're offering a number of specific dance approaches. One of which is developmental dance movement, which is the program that I designed as a dance science researcher. It's a program that's specific for early years development, from around about 2 up into 8 or 9, and again maybe extended for those children who have got developmental delays. It's a very specific approach that fosters, again, learning through movement, including dance and dance movement practices, so games and activities. And also, when we're thinking about movement, we have to also consider the development of not just gross motor movement, but fine motor movement as well. So all of those things are considered in that. Then we're offering for older children with developmental delays, autism movement therapy. Autism movement therapy is an approach designed by one of our colleagues who is sadly not with us anymore, and it's very specifically an approach which she called waking up the brain. So it's all about, which is where I came in when I was talking about computers and computers going to sleep. You know, it's all about stimulating and waking up the brain and priming it for learning, but it includes some specific techniques that are specially considered for the neurological differences in the autistic brain. And that is suitable for children from around about, younger children can probably access it Many younger children will probably access it really well too, but it's specifically designed for children from about age 7 all the way up to adult. And the very important thing about this is that it's not just for the individuals or children with autism to access this work, but also it's designed to be a fun a session that can be joined in with equally for children who are neurotypical and for parents and carers as well. So the third thing that we should really highlight is, yes, physical development needs to be spotlighted. Yes, emotional support needs to be spotlighted, and also this social aspect that a lot of children are interacting. Our social interaction is very, very much restricted within our own family members. So we need to enhance that by doing some intentional socially interactive activities.
Sure, that was great. I mean, it is very exciting to learn more about this combination of sensory and yoga and dance. So we have our first question coming in from Asghar Hussain, whose son Araf, who is 4 years old on the autism spectrum, and he cannot still converse or talk reciprocally, and may or may not be able to follow a lot of instructions as well. He's in fact quite interested in music, and the parent would like to know how they can utilize this interest in music and take it towards dance, and how can this music and dance thing actually help his development.
Yes, that's an excellent question. It'll take me a little while to unpick, because there's a few things that I think are important to highlight. The first is that it's great that he likes music, because one of the most important aspects that music can offer, particularly for children with autism, and particularly for children who have delayed speech and language development, is the beat, the rhythm. Rhythm is very, very intertwined with our speech and language development. So even something simple, like putting on a piece of music that he might like, and encouraging him to respond to the beat, to be able to copy a basic rhythm, but either by clapping or by tapping. And again, you can include a socially interactive piece, so you can do that together, opposite each other perhaps, and start by maybe clapping the beat, and then by tapping the beat, and then you could do it with your feet, you could do it with different parts of the body. That would be a baseline that I think would be very, very helpful to encourage, and therefore you reduce the need for any complex or detailed instruction. It's just a very simple copy me, and then once you're able to engage in that kind of interaction, then you can start to develop those rhythms. And once you start developing rhythms, and they can still be simple at first, once you start developing rhythms, and one of the things actually this relates to is one of the other sessions that we're offering as part of this online program, which we are calling Rhythm and Rhyme, because once you're able to follow a basic metronome rhythm, you can start to include some very simple nursery rhymes or poems, and that is again another way of engaging and supporting speech and language development without the need for detailed or complex instruction. And I'd encourage you. I'm sure there'll be some examples maybe that you'll be able to tap into that are culturally specific, that might be different to the kinds of rhythms and rhyme session that we're offering. But we're also very, very aware as part of this program, because we have the potential to extend it worldwide, that some of those cultural differences are being considered as well.
Okay, great. We have our second question from Shreya Bhardwaj, and she is asking about how can we facilitate self-regulation in young children using the movement-based therapies?
Yes, good question. I think I've touched on some of it before. So, I mean, self-regulation can be approached in various different ways, but from a movement point of view, breathing is the seat of it, really. It's the foundation of it. So regulating our breathing, literally pausing. The pause is really important. So it's a pause through breath, it's movement and pausing, and really being drawn intentionally into the present moment. Also, what's particularly helpful is increasing an awareness of our physical body. So that can be done through movement practice. It can be done through enhancing the physical sensation of our body. So it can include tapping, stroking, adding some pressure, either with somebody else. So if you're there with your parents or your carers, you can add some nice pressure, and you can also use some props to do that too, such as blankets and cushions, etc.
Sure, I'm sure. Yes, that's very interesting to know, actually, because we intend to do sensory in a very separate way, in a separate session. But it's really great and enlightening to know that it's not just about a sensory session. In fact, the sensory can be taken over and joined together with other things as well. So
absolutely,
yeah, sure. So we have another question from Shreya again, and Shreya is a professional in special education and psychology who would like to know that if in your experience, if this is something that has come across to you, that if somebody is a wheelchair bound and is also the age group is an adolescent age group, which means it might be a little difficult to actually carry them in our lap and then make them move, which might be possible for a very young child who has movement based on neurological difficulty. But for an adolescent who is a little older and is also wheelchair bound, is there any way to use movement? Is there any way to make sure that the approaches that we are talking about can help this individual to develop his gross motor abilities?
Yes, I love this question. I love this question because I think it's a whole area that's massively misunderstood. So movement, intentional movement, is very extremely important for brain activity. So, as you know, and as I've highlighted, my particular interest is about using movement to support cognitive development. Now, individuals, and this includes individuals of all ages who are non-ambulant, wheelchair bound, it's important for them to be able to move from a kind of physiotherapy point of view in order for their body to stay as strong and as responsive as possible. And there are lots of programs. I'm not sure, again, because of the cultural differences, I'm not sure about what's available where you are, but certainly in the UK, there are lots of programs that are available to help support those objectives for individuals who who are non-ambulant and wheelchair and those who are wheelchair bound, and that's essential, very important physiotherapy intervention. However, when you're considering this from a neurological point of view, there becomes a very important distinction that gets started to be highlighted, because it's one of the things that that we try and enhance an understanding of when we're working with groups and staff who are supporting children with the projects that we're doing. It's a very different thing when you are manipulating somebody else's body and you are manipulating it in order for the body to exercise itself. But actually, as soon as you start to do that, their brain activity becomes less involved in that experience. When you ask an individual to contribute their own original movement, that process starts to involve their own it starts to activate the brain in a different way. So then you're talking about the body-brain connection, and it's the body-brain connection that is important for that relationship to be enhanced between physical experience and cognitive development. So to give you a concrete example of this, I'm going to tell you a narrative of when I was at Harvard University presenting some research a couple of years ago. It's a big conference. It's the World Conference on Movement and Cognition. A very esteemed scientific committee, and the director of the conference shared this story, and I think this really highlights it very well. He was telling a story retrospectively about a conference where he was presenting. Can you still hear me? Because I've got
yes, please. Yes, okay. Please go ahead. Yes. Oh, we are reconnecting. I can see a message saying we are reconnecting. We can hold on for a moment.
Was presenting at a conference, and the neuroscientist, physicist Steve, as we might all know, Stephen Hawking was an incredibly intelligent genius scientist, also non-ambulant, in a wheelchair, requiring lots of support. And so at the end of this particular presentation, the director is a doctor in brain rehabilitation with a specialism in neurodevelopment, neonatal development. So just out of respect, really, went up to Stephen Hawking at the end of the session and said, I hope you enjoyed what I had to say, and I apologise if any of what I said made you personally feel uncomfortable, because obviously he was talking about this body-brain connection and the importance of that brain activity, and Stephen Hawking replied to him by saying, "No, I completely agree with you. I play tennis every day." And obviously there was a long pause after that, because one didn't quite know how to answer him. And then he said, "In my mind."
Yeah.
So there is a very big distinction between being manipulated for your kind of external and internal physical health, but actually having some intentional, original movement processing going on inside your brain, even though that connection might not physically manifest in movement, the brain activity is the same. Does that illustrate it?
Yeah.
So the two things are necessary.
I'm sure, and I can completely agree and relate to what you just described as having inside the brain, as movement being inside the brain as well, other than being physically manipulated. In fact, we were as a part of a course where I was also teaching an autism and SI course during this lockdown period, and we talked in detail about the mirror neurons, about how the neurons that are responsible for the same action that the other person is doing can get triggered and stimulated even if you are observing him, even if you are trying to see him. So I'm sure that when Stephen Hawking says that he plays tennis, he definitely means it, because he can still feel it, he can still do it within his brain. So that was a great explanation to explain something for a person who apparently, for anybody, has a very physical disability, so to say, that how would movement help him at all, or how would even he get movement inputs if he's wheelchair bound, or if he's not somebody who is up and about. And in our occupational therapy also, a lot of times it has been discussed in the textbooks that how the recent approaches in the neuro rehabilitation have come up with body weight support treadmill training. So even if you're not able to walk, even if you're on a treadmill, you might be actually, and it's not just in the brain, you might actually be put on a treadmill and to stimulate your legs, because your whole body would have a harness system, and that harness system would support your body weight, and will not allow you to go out of the treadmill. So you might actually be running on a treadmill, or you might actually be feeling the movement in your legs, even if only your upper body works, or even if the upper body does not work. It's all the mechanical supports that are given to you that will enable you to actually get inputs, and which will also stimulate the motor programs which are already there. The motor programs are there, but this is rehabilitation. The person has actually lost something that he always had, which means he has a motor program, but it just needs a little more sensory stimulation to be triggered. But coming from you and coming from that simplified version of it, it helps us understand those textbooks things even more and even better. So
and dance has a very unique and important contribution to make here. There's a researcher based in the UK whose work involves a lot of work involves this mirror neuron phenomenon, and she uses dance to explore it, because we know obviously dance by nature involves complex movement patterns, probably the most complex movement patterns that exist in physical activity. And so it makes sense to explore from a scientific point of view the phenomenon of mirror neurons through dance. But also one of the things we know through that research is that people who have dance experience, so who have physicalized dance, it might be many years before. They may not have ever danced recently. It could be decades before. But when they watch dance activity as a spectator, as an audience member, once you have been through that process, you've had those experiences, you've practiced those complex movement patterns in whatever capacity you're able to, bearing in mind the last question, your brain activity, watching it, is the same as if you were doing it. So that very much relates, back to that original question.
Sure. We have a question from a parent, Farman Parvez, who is asking, would it be possible to safely use a movement-based approach for a child who has a seizure disorder, including using a treadmill probably for movement? But I'm sure the question is also about, the question here is about whether movement can be safely used for children who have a seizure disorder.
I think obviously on a case-by-case individual basis, you would have to follow your medical practitioner's advice. I can't answer on an individual basis. Obviously, what I can say is, as an organisation, as a charity, we work with a lot of groups and with children with particular difficulties, some of which do have seizures as part of their unique profile, and they still participate in various physical activities, which include dance and dance movement based activities. But obviously it needs to be in a very carefully managed environment, and it needs to follow that particular child's or individual's medical practitioner's advice.
Sure. Ali, before the show, we were talking about a little bit about how the neuro aspect or the brain function as an aspect can be discussed a little in briefly. And I would love to do that from you, because there are a lot of professionals and psychologists also in the viewers. So if you could throw some light on what are the basic neuro concepts or basic neuro functions that are actually a part, or that are actually part of the whole mechanism through which there is a change while we use dance and movement.
Yes. So basically, our brain, it sounds a really bold thing to say, but actually the reason that we have brains is in order to move. I would, if you're finding that sort of difficult to take in, anybody who's listening, I would suggest that you have a look at Daniel Woolpert's TED Talk. I think it's called "The Reason We Have Brains," and he describes that from an evolutionary point of view, that's the only reason that we have brains, because we need to move. And then for those of you who are interested, after this talk, once you've watched that, then you can have a look at my TED Talk as well, which is called "Why Movement Works for Learning." Why movement works for learning, and they're both about, like most TED Talks, they're about 20 minutes each. So basically, the whole of there's not one area in the brain that is movement focused. Having highlighted that the reason that we have brains is in order to move, you can start to understand that from kind of a neuroscience perspective, from a neuro anatomical perspective, pretty much every part of our brain is involved in some aspect of movement. I wonder if I can. I'm going to see if I can go for a screen share. I don't know if it will work from a technical point of view, but I'll give it a go.
Let's try.
How's this? Is this working? Can you see that?
Waiting for the screen. Sure. Still doesn't show any change. We haven't been able to receive any shared screen. We are not able to see a shared screen. We are still looking at the original one. Yeah. No, okay, it doesn't work.
Let's try again.
Yeah.
Aha. This might
Just
work, I
wanted
think.
just wanted to add the comment that add another comment to what you were already saying. Yeah, we can see that. We are
Does
able
that
to see
work?
that.
Yes,
Yeah,
go
it
ahead.
does. It does.
Add your comment, Manish.
Yeah, come again.
Yes, add your comment. You wanted to add a comment.
Yes. So the comment was about how, like you said, the reason that we have brain, and I'm sure what also comes from the sensory integration kind of a perspective is that we have been studying about the other way around of studying why the brain is there for movement purposes, is that they actually did deprivation studies, that they subjected humans, or not really humans but animals, and they deprived them of movement. They kept them into a little bit of restricted mobility. Not just mobility, but also was about any other sensory input was very limited. And they have been studying this since many years now, from the psychology perspective, from the sensory integration perspective. And they all agree that if you do not get sensation, including movement, then your brain actually gets very disorganized, and the brain gets into a very withdrawn and hostile kind of an emotion. It has been proven by experiments, and there are lot of videos around that, which again comes from the same fact that you have put it across in different words, of course, is that the brain system has been developed in such a way, has been wired in such a way, that sensory input and movement is vital for its functioning.
Absolutely. And that
Yes,
brings
please.
us back to, spotlighting all of this, in the context of this current pandemic, that it can so easily get ignored. And actually, we need this awareness more than ever, really. So let me attempt to screen share this again and see if this is going to work.
So we can see the brain now.
Oh, you can see the brain now. I was going to
Yes,
try and make it.
yes.
I was going to try and make it bigger because it's very small on my.
It's No, it's great as far as my screen is concerned. It's perfect.
Oh,
It's
good.
perfect in size.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. All right, excellent. So here at the base we have really what is the brain stem, our sort of more primitive brain, and from an evolutionary point of view, this is where we start. So this is the cerebellum, and the cerebellum is our kind of balance center, and obviously, in order to be able to kind of calibrate ourselves in the world, balance is essential. Then we move up to this blue area here. You can see the colours, obviously, to this blue area here, which is the occipital lobe. So this is our area responsible for vision. Sorry, I've got some noise coming from the background here, and again, sort of, if we think about, our vision as being our pilot, you can imagine that we're processing everything through our occipital lobe. All of our senses are piloted by our vision. We only need to know that by doing, activities with eyes closed. And that's another thing I think to highlight here when people are asking about strategies. Doing some self-regulation and physical activities once we close our eyes gives us some really interesting and more intense kind of sensory input as well, because we take that overarching kind of pilot away. Then kind of moving up, actually I'll go here first, into the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is responsible largely for our auditory processing, but also inside there, and we've both referred to this through our discussion up till now, it's also the center for our vestibular feedback. So again, that's our way of kind of calibrating our own body to the environment as well. So of course, very, very involved in movement. In fact, the whole vestibular system exists through the inner ear, through these 3 semicircular canals that literally stimulate the little hairs inside them through particular movement planes. So and then moving up to the parietal lobe, of course, this is the area that we process sensory input, feedback and input. And here, where this little line is here, is what's known as the somatosensory cortex. Soma in the Greek means body. So it's the way that our body processes all of our sensory experiences, and not necessarily that surprisingly, as we move into the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is really where we carry out what's really termed as our executive function, our kind of more formal reasoning kind of thinking, our intellectual thinking, if you like. The very first cortex here is the motor cortex. So one might say that that's the movement part of the brain, but of course that would be disregarding all of this, which is also very much involved with movement. And you can see, literally you can see, this is why I'm so keen on sharing the neuroanatomy, because once you see it like this, you know, it makes it so concrete, you know, that here our whole frontal lobe, the area that is about our executive function, about our reasoning, about our intellect, has literally grown out of our sensory and motor experiences. Literally, our brain has grown from the way we move and the way we feel and relate to our body. One can't argue with that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for a wonderful explanation of it. We have a question from Selina Sultana, and she has another question regarding the people who are have physical limitations and are on a wheelchair. So the aspect of social distancing that we say, and the aspect of movement therapy. She has raised 2 things in her question. That on one side, they are a little dependent on others as people. They are someone who are dependent on others, that others support, physical support, their support for self-care. And we are in a world where social distancing is being regarded as a new normal. So again, that is like a huge contrast, a huge irony to say, on one side, it is absolutely vital that we give them physical support in their daily living activities. On other side, we are supposed to practice social distancing. And so our questions are 2 then. How and what can we do about it? If that is a question that you have any comments on. I think it has to come more from the philosophical point of view than from a science point of view, because we have to still figure out many things actually. And the other question is, can movement therapy actually help, something similar to what we discussed earlier? Can movement therapy actually help people who have difficulties relating to being dependent on others for their self-care, for their physical support and balance? Can movement therapy actually help them?
Yeah, I think I've addressed that already. I mean, in short, absolutely yes. And it needs to be considered from those 2 aspects. It needs to be considered from the health of the body and having, you know, the most appropriate and beneficial physiotherapy intervention to make sure that the body stays as strong and as responsive as possible. But it also has to be considered from the neurological perspective, and those 2 things are the approaches need to be quite distinct and fully understood because I think one at the moment often gets served a lot more and a lot better than the other. So I hope I have addressed that. Also, this would be a good point to say that, you know, all of the activities that Movement Works offer and are considering on an online program are designed to be fully inclusive. So while obviously there are some sessions that take an ambulant individual as a baseline, all of the activities, because I believe everybody can dance and be involved in dance and dance movement activity, and everything should be inclusive, is, you know, from our point of view, is inclusive and therefore can be adapted. So I don't believe that you should be put off by being, you know, disabled in any way to participating in activity, especially considering what I've just said about, you know, participating in your mind is actually really very important. But also just to say, you know, we are also including some specific sessions for non-ambulant children and older individuals. So they are going to be especially offered activities that can be done all the way through from a chair, you know. So that's really important from a philosophical point of view, in terms of, you know, caring for an individual and social distancing. I mean, social distancing is, you know, a big challenge for our social and emotional well-being for all of us, and so I think we're all going to struggle with, you know, what that really means in this new normal and how it's going to affect us. And there are a lot of individuals, you know, on the autistic spectrum who are going to have massive challenges with understanding what social distancing means and is, and their ability to be able to do that. So I mean, that is a huge area that is, you know, currently and from an ongoing point of view, quite a big challenge for lots of people with additional needs of all different kinds, you know.
Very, very well said, Ali. And again, in line with what you said just now, from the occupational therapy point of view, from the rehabilitation point of view, I'm sure there will be a lot of movement-based activities that are possible for even for people who are on a wheelchair or who have physical limitations. Even if we want to keep a physical distance and provide them movement-based activities, I'm sure it's all about adaptations. It's a part of our core therapeutic work, that whenever there have been challenges, when we had we also have children and adults who have severe physical difficulties to move around, there have always been a lot of ideas around how can we incorporate so many things. So I'm sure if physical limitation is a challenge, the therapists like you, therapists from the dance and movement side, therapists from the occupational therapy domain side, therapists from dance and movement and art-based side, all therapists in a way do come together, and they bring in a lot of adaptations about how can we give movement to people who are still a little have difficulties. You know, if we look at the kind of events or sports events that Paralympics have, or people who are wheelchair bound have, they have whole tournaments of sports or physical activities built around them. So I'm sure there will be a lot of programs that can be developed, like you have developed already, and in future also there will also be a lot of brainstorming by all the professionals to make sure that the children or people who have physical limitation will also have opportunities to move, even if they are physically at a distance from the person who is really trying to help them or provide them the movement. I'm sure there will be a lot of adaptations around it. A parent from Kolkata, Sumitra Paul Bakshi, has requested for the links that you had mentioned about the TED Talk, about any other links relevant to the topic that we had just now. If those can be kind of put on the social media, at least on the page that we are broadcasting this live program from, at some point of time, maybe whenever you have a moment, you could send it to us, and then we will be able to give it provided on the link, or maybe you can yourself
Sure,
post it on the
sure.
FB Live.
My TED Talk is available. There's a direct link to it from the homepage of the website, www.movementworks.org. So you can find the TED Talk there. You can also find a short film there about the work that we do as well. So you can kind of get an overview. You'll see there are lots of individuals, children who are on the autistic spectrum, who are non-ambulant, who are in wheelchairs. So the full range of children with various and individuals with various different needs. The TED Talk that I referred to at the beginning, Daniel, he's called Daniel Woolpert. He's a neuroscientist, and I believe the TED Talk is called "The Reason We Have Brains." I think you could just Google it; it'll come straight
Sure.
up too. I'm reading a note from my esteemed colleague here, Jane Ferris Richardson, who's come up. Hi, Jane, if you're watching. She says, when you talk about the process that takes place in the brain and the mind and the senses in movement, it's possible to see how movement also engages the imagination. Absolutely. One way, she says, the arts are so important. Absolutely. Yeah. And motivation, kind of, I guess that's a good place to kind of start to round it up as well with the first question that you asked me, which is motivation, keeping the motivation for moving regularly in between, more sedentary style learning. Keeping that motivation going is really going to come from two places. One, from understanding that it's really, really important, and not asking children to behave in a way that, isn't neuro and physiologically possible for them. It's not even possible for us, really. And secondly, to find imaginative, artistic and fun ways to engage in that movement activity. And I would say, because it's so important, in kind of social interaction as well. So, movement-based games, fun things that you can do together, whoever you're in these restricted circumstances with. It's not just about kind of coexisting in a space, but it's actually, creating some intentional opportunities to both move together and to, interact in fun, social ways together as well. So, there are lots of fun ideas that we're exploring, and don't forget, for us, as a charitable organisation, it's a big learning curve for us, and it's one of the things, as a professional, if I'm completely honest, I'm struggling with the most, because when we work with our movement approach based programs face to face, one of the most important elements of that is the social interaction piece. I mean, for the most part, dance is a socially interactive activity. It's not something that you generally do on your own, unless you're developing vocational skill, elitist, to be an elite performer, and then you might spend hours in a studio on your own perfecting techniques, or like a pianist would, working with or a string player with their instrument. But generally speaking, dance is a we go out dancing with people. We don't, generally speaking, go and dance on our own in that way. And I'm very much missing, that essential element of the work, and trying to find interesting and creative ways to, have some meaningful interaction activities that we can encourage people to get involved with, whoever they're living with in these restricted times. So I hope that has been communicated. And the other thing is, space. We're all in these, to a greater or lesser degree, limited spatial conditions, and one of the things that's impossible really to do at the moment, which as a dance person, as a movement person, exploring space and exploring how your body interacts with that space, again, has to be done in different ways right now.
So thank you, Ellie. We had around this much amount of time for today, and it was wonderful meeting you. For all the viewers here, I would again like to share that Faith Bangladesh has online consultations available. You can avail consultation for sensory issues. You can avail consultation for special education, speech and language. There are consultants on the board. There are therapists on board. And wherever you are in India, in Bangladesh, in any other Asian countries, you can directly go to the dashboard and book an appointment, and you would be able to receive services which are completely online. So having said that, thank you so much, Ali, and thank you from our Soch team. All the therapists here would have enjoyed watching you one more time in live. And from Faith's team, Mr. Mohammed Rafiqul, who is our manager from the technical training unit, Madam Nilofer Appa is the head of the Faith Bangladesh. We all would like to thank you, along with Mr. Aftabuddin, who is the head of the training unit at the Public Health Organization, ICDDR. We all would, on behalf of all of them, I would like to thank you and would like to interact with you at any appropriate time, one more time, maybe more frequently on this topic. So it was great interacting with you, and see you sometime soon.
Thank you. Have a good evening.